what I want to talk about today is to think about things a little bit differently. Now, whenever we run projects or we run programs, and I'm going to try to differentiate those two concepts, programs versus projects. I've been a project manager, I've been a program manager, and until I became a program manager, I didn't appreciate the difference. And there's very profound differences, and I'm going to talk about those. But a lot of our job or role is to mitigate risks. But how do you mitigate risks you're not even aware are there? How do you discover the risks that come and bite you and say, I didn't know that was even important? There's certain risks we know about, schedule risks and budget risks and all those kinds of things. They're obvious to us. But there's a whole bunch of risks out there that are not obvious to us. And so I built a framework that I call it a capability lens. I want to introduce this to you. And the premise is based, because I have a background in data analytics, the premise I'm taking here, this doesn't cover all kinds of projects. I'm talking about projects and programs that are trying to make an organization become more data-driven, whatever that happens to be. And that's a really big thing in our economy today. People are want to become more competitive and to improve their outcomes by becoming data-driven and taking advantage of all the stuff that we know in that space today. So that's my premise. And I want to introduce some of these ideas. So the idea is we need to be on the same page in terms of terminology. So I'm going to do a really quick review to give you a really bird's eye view of some what look like maybe some overlapping or competing terms, and to give you a definition, because what I think emerges then, definitions come and go, but concepts evolve, and we need to understand what are the common themes that come from these definitions that are important to understand. Because a lot of our risks come from not understanding what things mean and having misalignment. We talked about conflict earlier. A lot of that conflict is we don't understand what we're talking about. We call it tomato, you call it tomato, and I'm not sure we're even on the same page here. So that's part of the original part here. I'm going to introduce the idea of what a capability is from my definition and what it means to map capabilities to say what the dependencies are that will eventually drive some kind of an outcome. And it's through understanding the capabilities you're trying to build and the ones that are kind of deficient introduce really significant risks to you making your success. So I want to talk about what it means to turn a capability into a bunch of components. And there's going to be 4 components to a capability. I'm going to get into this in a second. And if those components are substandard or not working well, it's very analogous to having a soft tire or a flat tire in your car. It's going to hold you back. And having a soft tire or a flat tire in your car is a risk. I want to find out where are these risks, because there's new things we're getting into as we become more data-driven. There's many more organizational issues. There's many more soft issues. It's not about technology. Although technology is critical, it's not about technology. So we have to understand the kinds of risks that are facing our organization if we want the true success we're looking for. So the premise here is I'm the CEO of a company and I want to transform it to becoming data-driven. I read about it in an airplane magazine. I think we should become data-driven. Well, the question is, what does that mean and why do you want to do it? Once we understand some of these drivers as to what it means and why you want to do it, then we can understand what are the things that are going to hold you back, which are risk areas you want to identify. So if you look at just a Google search on some of these terms, the world's looking very complex, very complicated. There's many pieces of data, many pieces of technology. It's a very rapidly changing landscape. So it looks daunting, it looks noisy, it looks confusing. Being confused is a big source of risk. So it looks complicated. And the other things that drive this is there's many different terms out there that people talk about when you're using the words of data-driven. Now, I don't care if you're an accountant or in marketing or an engineer or a business person or an operations person. We have different backgrounds and we use different words for certain things. So whether we call things operational excellence or business strategy or analytics or business intelligence, these are all kind of terms that fly around out there that we think we know what we're talking about, but we don't. So what are the things that are important? And if we can't filter out the essential things from the noisy things, again, we're going to be confused and we're not going to be aligned. So right off the bat, we want to talk about some terminology that'll set the stage for us. So we want to, first of all, reduce the confusion by talking about some concepts. And again, as I said, some terminology is more common in certain industries with different age groups. It's demographic based, depending if you're in your 20s, 30s, or whatever. some terminology evolves over the decades, and some terminology is invented because we think it's new, when really it's not. It's just an old concept with some new things and we put new words on it. So part of our challenge is to find out what some of these terms mean. Now the term business intelligence has been around as a term since the 90s, but it officially got identified back at IBM's labs in the 1950s. So this term has been around. Now some people try to marginalize this term today and say, "Ah, that's old school, that's yesterday's news." But that's because people define it a certain way. I'm going to define this as business intelligence to me is not a bunch of things, it's a bunch of capabilities, which I'm going to define in a few minutes. It's the capability to intelligently solve problems and to intelligently accomplish goals. So to me, I want to become better, faster, and smarter at what I do in my organization. So think of BI or business intelligence, not a bunch of reports and a bunch of dashboards. They're important, but it's the capabilities we build to become better, faster, smarter. So the first theme here is a capability. Another term, analytics, is out there, and people say, is BI and analytics the same thing? They're not the same thing, but they're highly related, in my view. So I think of analytics as a capability, again, to do what? To generate net new information, or to generate an insight. Net new information is things you didn't have before because you weren't measuring it, or you didn't have a scenario plan for it, you didn't have a perspective on it, so the data didn't exist. But an insight is that thing that's really valuable to you. It's within the right context. An insight should drive new behavior. So analytics is a process or capabilities to generate this net new information somehow and to generate insights to make them useful somehow. So that's what we're generating here, is information and new insights. Now the term data science is a big buzzword. It's flying around a lot. So is data science the same as these things? Well, they overlap and they intersect, but in my view, if it's really data science and not this data playing, but if it's truly science, it has a research component to it. There's experimentation, there's experimental execution, there's data analysis from experiments, and conclusions are drawn. Inferences or hypotheses are tested or whatever. So think of data science as having a solid experimental foundation to discovering new things. So it's related to analytics, but it's based on experimentation. Big data is a big hype word out there. What does this mean? Well, people think big data means lots of it. Well, that isn't really what it means in my view. You don't have to be big, you don't have to be voluminous to be big. And the example I like to use is, I don't know if people follow college football in the States, but there's a conference called the Big Ten. Well, how can 10 be big? 10's only 10. How can you be big and be 10? It's big because it's impactful, important, and significant. They have high stature, they have significance. So big doesn't have to be voluminous, it can mean impactful or important. And so it's characterized by different terms that we talk about: volume, variety, and velocity. That kind of characterizes the data, and they don't have to all three be true to be big. So big data becomes transformative. It changes things. I call big data as non-traditional data. Data that didn't exist prior to 5 or 6 years ago. And it's come out of the smartphone revolution and the social media revolution and the GPS revolution. All of these things have generated all kinds of new sources of data. It means that people other than yourselves are generating it, which introduces all kinds of problems with veracity and trust and confidence. And the really big issue is, how do you make money with it? What's the value proposition by having this data available? So it doesn't have to be large to be big. It means it's transformative. So let's keep that in mind. There's an older term. I went to university a lot of years ago now, and I took courses in management science. I have an engineering background, but I took courses in management science as part of my degree. You don't hear this term so much anymore, but management science is kind of that disciplinary, quantitative approach to understanding business problems and building models to solve them. So it's highly related to analytics, data science, and business intelligence. There's kind of another term out there for it. Think of it as evidence-based decision making. Now, the idea of being data-driven is, don't come to me with an opinion, come to me with evidence and facts to back up your opinions. And so this is from Deming, who is a leading, long since passed away now, but Deming was a guru in quality management and quality improvement. And he was highly forceful about saying, show me the evidence. Don't just show me an opinion. Opinions are a dime a dozen. I want facts and evidence. So if you're data-driven, it means you're taking intelligent actions based on that business intelligence concept. So to me, data-driven and business intelligence are kind of similar because we're using evidence to drive new capabilities. So if you're investing in any of this stuff, the question is why? Because if you're going to build programs and projects to deliver stuff here, what's your success criteria? What are you trying to accomplish here? And so think of this as a value-generating machine. We make decisions in companies to do things. Those decisions, if they're acted on, produce actions which produce some sort of a result. That's the impact we produce. And we're doing this for decades. We don't have to be data-driven to make decisions because companies have been around for decades and decades and decades. We've been making money for a lot of time. Now we want to become data-driven. We're adding stuff to the original decision-making engine. And we're adding analytics, which is to make new information and insights available to drive the behavior of the decision maker, to give them different options and choices. There's a data component that drives the analytics, but the big flywheel that drives it is culture. And culture is everything about how people perceive their role. Do you know what data mining is? The data is mine, mine, mine. That's equivalent to data hoarders. Data hoarders don't like to share. And so if you're a data hoarder or a data miner in that kind of silly context, it means that you're trying to maintain your own power base in a company by not sharing what you have. There's all kinds of issues around making this available and sharing so we can make this machine happen. And so this becomes the basis for where we want to head. The true measure of success is going to be recorded in an uptick in some sort of an impact. Where are you better? Show me the evidence. Are you safer? Are you cleaner? Are you less wasteful? Are you making more money? Are you less risky? These are the things that matter. Everything else doesn't matter. So we have to construct our approach to make sure we get the results we're looking for. Otherwise, it was probably a waste of time. So I'm going to use the word impact as the result of what we're producing if we're investing with projects and programs to deliver these things. Impact can be measured by looking at a new outcome, which is a result of our actions. It could be a new activity we're doing, or it could be a condition in our people or in our customers or our products or our environment. So some sort of a condition-based thing. You could argue there's probably 5, maybe this isn't complete, but I think of 5 categories of impact. So we can make our companies more impactful or more successful by looking at how effective we are. Effective behavior means you're accomplishing the goals in front of you. You know what behaviors to do to make your goals magic happen. Efficiency is all about doing more with less, using less resources to produce a similar kind of outcome. Quality is all about doing things consistently with less waste and less rework. Agility, in a business sense, means I can respond more quickly to changing business conditions. I have a responsive nature, so I don't get caught off guard by a disruptive business beside me. And innovative means I can disrupt others. I can make new products and services that are available to gain my market share or to do something in my self-interest to compete. So think of these as 5 categories of impact. When I get into the capability map in a few minutes, we have to kind of pick one of these. What are we trying to be impactful in? It's going to drive the capabilities we have to build to get there. Now, the common themes from these definitions are capability-based. I haven't defined a capability yet, but I will very shortly. And a capability, right now, say it's the capacity to do something. It's based on the conditions we put into our world by doing things differently. It's the results we achieve. There's processes involved. And obviously, there's big data sets, or not big, bad word. There's different data sets available to us to make this kind of happen. So these somehow have to add up to a value proposition. And it's like making a nice pot of chili. These are the ingredients to my chili, and the value is a nice bowl of chili that tastes really good. So that's what we're trying to do here is make these things blend into a nice recipe for success. Now the question is, why would companies want to do this? Why do they want to invest in activities to make themselves more data-driven? Well, I've listed 9 possible things as maybe. Again, they go back to what I just said, but maybe to become more effective, more innovative, maybe you want to be disruptive. You want to be more confident in what you're doing, so there's less, you're more aggressive because you're more confident what you're doing. You're maybe more sustainable from a safety or environmental point of view. You're more consistent, you're more agile. So these are the categories of impact, but they're all based on the strategic intent of the company. Why do you exist? What are you trying to do? And how will these things help you get there? So this becomes the context for talking about risks, because if you're not going to get there, something's holding you back. Those some things are risks, because there's something you haven't considered, or some random thing happened to you to hold back your plans to move forward. Now to talk about capabilities, we have to go from that idea of that gearbox model to bringing people into the equation. It's when people combined with the machine, we're going to start talking about capability. And so now we've introduced the human component, and humans are ornery, right? They don't like to do what, they don't like to change. They don't like, they're ornery people. We know that, we are one. So we're going to talk about what a capability means once people plus the gears become combined. So here's an example. If we think about an automobile, and this is in the current world, this is not the autonomous vehicle, this is the current world we live in. If you think about a car sitting there in your driveway, all by itself, it has zero capability to move. It's got all the potential to move, but it can't move because it's just a physical object. It's got gas in the tank, it's all assembled nicely, it's got air in the tires, all the oil's there, it's all there, but if you looked at it and say move, it can't move. It's going to just sit there. What does it take to make movement happen? You have to add a human to it. Now you think of the human as having all the potential, all the training, all the necessary skills to give motion to that car. So the human by themselves cannot go 100 kilometers an hour. The idle car by itself cannot go 100 kilometers an hour. Combined, they can. Now when you combine these things together, you're doing what's called the emergent property. The emergent property is what happens in a system when you combine the right ingredients. And that capability, the capability to move 100 kilometers an hour, is not evident in the person by themselves or in the car by themselves. When you combine them, you very much have that capability. So we're going to use this kind of idea to talk about capabilities you're trying to build to become data-driven. Okay, so think of that emergent property as the magic we're looking for to how do you get the 1 + 1 = 11, or some kind of a multiplier happening. So I want to introduce now a capability. There's some similarities to what we heard in the previous presentation because I'm just looking at it through a different lens, but I saw lots of similarities in some of those models. So I talk about 4 building blocks that make up a capability. And these 4 building blocks are process, the tools and techniques, what I'm going to call the standards and norms, and human skills. So if we think of these 4 things that have to come together to give us the capability we're looking for, we need tools and technologies, we need standard work processes to follow, we need human skills to use the tools in that process, and we have to be governed and organized in a way with policies and culture and leadership to kind of bring it together. And so if we do this properly, and we can construct these through projects and programs, then we can deliver the impact we're looking for. But a capability by itself is not an island. We're going to have to say there's many capabilities. We have to map them, which should drive what we have to build, which should then give us the basis to say, where's our risk areas? Because once we know what we have to build, that'll drive our project charters and all that kind of stuff. But if we find out that in our car example, we've got a soft tire or a flat tire, because one of those puzzle pieces isn't working properly, it's going to hold us back. And that's what we're trying to find out. That's going to be a risk area. So think of this as the capacity to execute based on its design. But think of a capability as an input-output. It really is a system of things that takes some kind of inputs, and we call those dependencies, and it produces some kind of an output. We're going to call it an impact. So we have to say, what's the purpose of the capability? What are the pieces we need? And what's its job in a bigger picture? So here's an example of where they become dependent. And we have to map these to say, and I'll give you a more tangible example in a second. So if different capabilities are there, and then they implement, they elevate to another capability, it's the final impact we care about, and this model says these 3 things are important to be done to achieve that impact. Now this is pretty abstract at this point, so I need to give you an example. So let me talk about, the World Series just finished last night, so this is kind of apropos to talking about what are the capabilities you need if you're going to manage and own a professional baseball or Major League Baseball team. Very, very simple model, because I want to make it simple on purpose. But there's different layers, there's different levels, and the ultimate impact of this baseball team has been given to say, just make the playoffs and increase your revenue. Now, all those that were baseball fans in Toronto 2 years ago, we kept upping the ante as what we thought was the impact. When the Jays first became competitive in August of 2 years ago, we said, oh, just be relevant. Just be in a pennant race. Play some meaningful baseball. Then they did. Okay, oh, now we want you to make the playoffs. Oh, now we really want you to win the division. Now we want you to win the ALCS. Now we want you to win the World Series. We kept raising our expectations for that impact, which is okay. So in this example, the impact I want is just to make the playoffs, be relevant and entertaining, and increase your revenue. So what are the things you have to do to get there? Well, you have to have a capability to win games, okay? So the more games you win, the better your chances are of doing that. How do you build the capability to make yourself win games? Well, I broke it into two categories. You have to have the capability to score runs, and you have to have the capability to prevent runs. Makes sense? So if you have just one of those two things, you're probably not going to win. You're just going to score, you may lose games that are high scoring. So what does it take to score runs? I have to have the capability to hit and have the capability to run. These are kind of at the team level, and these are kind of at the individual level. I need to have the capability to pitch, to catch, and to throw. And I believe if I can develop these capabilities, I will prevent runs, I will score runs, I'll win games, and I'll make my result. I'll be a happy camper. I'll be an entertaining, money-making kind of team. Well, how do you get these people in place to make that happen? So if these are individual capabilities, at the bottom, these are kind of organizational capabilities. I have to have people that can find the right players, evaluate talent, good scouts. So I have to find people, but how do I say this person's the one I want to sign, not that person? How do I evaluate? So I need the capability just to evaluate people. I have to have the capability to maintain their health, which means I have to have a good training set of people to keep them healthy and nutrition and all that, minimize injuries, all that kind of stuff. I have to have people, I have to have the capability to negotiate terms. So I get people in a contractual arrangement so they want to play for me or they can play for me. I have to have a winning culture. I have to have the capability to develop a winning culture. I could have a lot of high-priced, selfish individuals who don't want to play for the team, they just want a big contract, and they don't have a winning attitude. So I need to develop these things to have those players to do this thing to make this happen. So this becomes a simple example of how we can identify capabilities that complement or kind of depend on each other to drive up through the ranks. Now, if we said that this is, if you're analyzing, say, the Blue Jays or some other team, you may say the biggest risk area is this. A lot of injuries last year, which meant that their pitchers were compromised, which meant they didn't prevent a lot of runs, and they didn't win enough games. So if you're looking at the impact, and you did a risk analysis here, you say, that's where I need to focus. I have to keep my players healthier. I have to do something differently here. So this is the idea of using this to discover where are your risk areas, and I'm going to show a more specific example in a second, but this is how we can use this qualitatively, say, where are the areas I'm exposed, and how will being exposed there impact my ultimate thing I want to achieve? Okay, any comments so far, questions? How many have ever seen the strategy maps from using Balanced Scorecard? This is kind of a similar kind of mindset. You're kind of mapping things together to find out where their dependencies are. But this is for baseball. What I'm talking about in this little talk here is about being data-driven. So I have to have certain defined layers that make it more related to that. So I built this framework that, rather than baseball specific, I've got the idea of 4 layers plus an impact. So I want to explain each of these layers and say where are the risks that come out of this. So at the top, it's the impact I want to achieve by becoming data-driven. So yesterday I wasn't data-driven. Tomorrow I want to be data-driven. Why? Where's that net difference in terms of conditions or results or performance? Examples could be, I want higher margins, I want increased safety, happier customers, higher quality products, skilled staff, available resources. So that's potential impacts I could define. Now the risks introduced here is that we don't achieve that. So right off the bat, we could do all this investment, we're doing all this great stuff, we got scorecards coming out of the wazoo, but we're not seeing any measurable impact. And so with no impact, the needle's not moving, and the big risk is this isn't working, let's try something else tomorrow, because obviously this data-driven thing was a fad, it didn't work. So that's a big risk. Now, if you get into the next thing, which is the business capabilities, again, think of a capability as the capacity to do something. Before we're data-driven, we're already doing something. So go back, X number of years or whatever. We made stuff, we sold stuff, we billed our customers, we served our customers, we made money, whatever. So think of this as the areas we want to change because we think data-driven approaches will help those things become more innovative, more agile, more effective, et cetera. So the things we could focus on here are how we manage marketing campaigns, how we develop our assets, how we procure materials, how we plan sales targets. These are all things we do anyways, but the question is, which do we think are the most important ones that'll drive the impact we've selected? Now, the risks here are that we can't get people to change how they make decisions. There's a resistance to change out there. It's like having a car and the check engine light coming on and say, well, it doesn't mean not affecting me. I don't have to take my car to the mechanic. I'm just going to ignore the check engine light. So if people don't respond to the insights and information you're delivering them because they're afraid of it, they don't trust it, they don't want to be marginalized, and a whole bunch of other reasons, if people don't react to the information you're providing and it's business as normal, you will not see any change up there because they're not changing their behavior. And so those are big risks, is not having people respond to the transformative stuff that we can get them work on. Those are big risks. The analytic capabilities which enable the business, now these are so the output of the analytic capability is a net new piece of information or an insight. So think of we're feeding that into the business capability to make it change. So we could have an example, we could predict customer churn, we could measure quality, we could recommend actions, detect anomalies. There's all kinds of things we can do in the analytic space. There's all kinds of categories of analytics, which is beyond the scope of our discussion right now. But if we said that we want to define the analytics to put in place to create this new insight or this new class of information to decision makers, we have to define what they are. So let's say that we build that, and there are risks according to this as well, because we have to build stuff here. So some of the risks are that we build stuff nobody uses. So we have unused models. We have ignored insights. We have, maybe we framed the wrong problem. Maybe we're delivering the wrong information nobody cares about. We didn't frame the opportunity correctly. Maybe there's data latency and quality issues. Nobody trusts it or it's not timely enough. So it's not useful to the business capability area. So those are key risks we need to identify. Now, the analytic capabilities are enabled by data capabilities. Now, when I talk about data, I'm not talking about the data here. I talk about the data capabilities. These are the actions we have to do as people and as companies to acquire data, to store data, to protect data, to understand its quality, to understand all sorts of things about the data. So these are capabilities around the data asset. So the capacity to provision the necessary data to these guys so they can drive the insights. So think of these data capabilities as verbs. I want to acquire stuff, integrate stuff, cleanse stuff, describe stuff, and provision stuff. And if I have those capabilities, I'll have the right data at the right level of quality and security to enable this, to enable that, to drive the impact. Okay? Now, all of this depends 1,000% on the last block. And I'm going to call these, the risk related to the data side is that we're stuck with low quality, unusable data, poor understanding of it, a lack of awareness that it even exists, and low trust levels. So if you don't trust something, you're obviously not going to take action on it because you have no confidence in it. So those are big risk areas. As I said, everything now is supported and framed by the final foundation piece, which I'm calling organizational capabilities. So these are things like so think of this as the capacity to govern, to lead, and to transform. This is all about organizational politics. It's all about human skills. It's all about how we communicate, how we share, do we trust each other? It's all that human interaction stuff, which is a make or break stuff. So the organizational capabilities, we have to say, we might have to define an accountability model. Who's accountable for that result? What are the policies around our data? Now, I teach courses in data governance on occasion, and data governance is not always understood by the companies I go to. In my view, the really basic reason we want to govern data is to turn it into an asset. And if you think of an asset as no different than a car or a building or a machine, we know where our cars and our buildings and machines are. We've cataloged them. We know where they are. We know they're safe to use. We know that they're protected, they're secure, they're accessible. So if we take the same premise that our data has those features and we're governing it that way, then our data becomes a productive asset to us. It's no longer a cost center, it becomes a thing we invest in. That's a huge mind leap for people. That comes by governing it properly. So the policies around data as an asset need to be the same as how do we govern our buildings as an asset or our machines as an asset. It's the same kind of idea. We have to understand the different kinds of risks that are coming at us. And this is kind of what we're talking about in this session. Risks come at us from all sorts of things, not It could be from data, from technology, from people, from processes, or a lack of policy. There's all kinds of things why risks originate. Another big thing that this has to do with is people's ability to comprehend new data. We assume people can read a graph and interpret it. We assume people know what rate of growth is. We assume people know what exponential growth is. And sometimes they don't. They haven't been trained. And we assume, just like we have to have a trained driver of our car, if we don't have a trained user or consumer of information, then how do we expect them to make decisions on it if they don't have any understanding of it? So data literacy development becomes a big deal to make sure we can transform our behaviors. And change management obviously is a big deal because we're trying to transform how we behave, what we do, because these new insights are available. So these become, and the risks here are that we have weak leadership, we have a negative culture, and we have low data literacy. So these become three key areas of risk that'll hold us back. Okay, so now the idea is that we've got capabilities defined, but as I said earlier, these capabilities are kind of like a higher level view. When you get into projects as a project manager, you're not really building a capability. What you're building are the components of the capability. So I want to talk about that because before I do that, let me differentiate my view, the difference between a program and a project. And I've worked as both. I was a project manager for several years, leading teams that built stuff, mostly like databases, systems, that kind of stuff. And the stuff we built, call those assets. We delivered assets as a result of our work. We built stuff. But it was then I had a chance to, and project managers, at least in my experience, didn't always care how that stuff was going to be used. Their job was to build the stuff. It's like you're the car manufacturer. You build the car, and there's the car to be sold. I don't care how the driver drives it. It's just building the car. That's my experience as a project manager. I then had a chance to become a program manager for a large energy company out west, and I was leading a program on pipeline compliance. And pipeline compliance was a business problem that they had to demonstrate to the authorities or the regulators that their assets were being maintained and inspected as per the regulations and have evidence that they were so that they could be safe and reliable. And if they didn't pass these audits, then they could lose their license to operate. It was a business problem. Now, to solve the business problem, they needed assets. They needed a database. They needed systems. They needed processes. They needed policies. So at the program level, and I've learned much more about this since then, programs design and build capabilities. Projects deliver the components needed to support those capabilities. So I think of a program's job as being multidisciplinary, and if we have these 4 building blocks to be built, again, technology, processes, skills, and policies, depending on their current state, we may have a project to individually build those 4 things. So we may have a project to build policies, one to build technology and tools, one to build skills, and one to build some process improvement. But it's the program that brings it together. And that's the emergent property happening. If these 4 things are there, collectively the capability emerges. And that's what we have to think of between a program and a project. So there's different kinds of risks. At the project level, there's the risk of those components not fulfilling their design or their requirements. But there's another sort of risk at the program level, which is that they don't fit together. They don't create that emergent property, which is the capability I truly want. So I want to find out how to identify these risks so I can mitigate them and take action on them. So if we think of going from these capabilities, the things that really drive most things are these kind of 4 broad areas, which are part of how we build our leadership or sort of organizational capabilities. So it's how skills are developed, it's how policies are created. Do we have the right policies? Are they reasonable policies? Our culture, in terms of how we trust and respect or not each other. So how are we willing to share and collaborate? And leadership. Leadership is that motivator that sets a vision and motivates the troops to accomplish it. And leadership also brings with it accountabilities. So these become the key ingredients that I believe start as when you get a negative in one of these 4 things, that'll ripple up through that everything. It doesn't matter what you do up here project-wise, if this isn't in place, you're not going to get the capability emerging because there's something holding you back that we have to address. And so if we think about this as breaking, so what I've done here now is I've taken the 4 capability categories, and just by example, I have, these capabilities are from another presentation I gave to somebody else. So just think of these as capabilities, the capability to schedule gas, to provision data, to describe something and govern data. But they break into these 4 subcategories. These subcategories are the components. It's the project teams that build the components or modify existing components. And it's the program that synthesizes those 4 things to build the capability. And so if we're doing a risk assessment at a qualitative level, I mean, you can be much more formal and assess this, but for the purpose of our talk right now, I'm simply saying suppose we have the ability to assess how well these are working. This simply says what are the things that have to work well to accomplish our goal. And so if we think right now we don't know what those are, we've gone off and done an assessment, and now we say at a component level, I've done my survey, I've done some workshops, some assessments, and I've come back and I've scored these on a high, medium, and low scale. I can start to see where my flat tires are in my car. And everything red here is something that's going to hold me back from success. And so in this simple example, all 4 of them means I have no policies or poor policies to drive how I do things, how I get data and govern that, how I build models, and how I develop policies to change my, my accountability model in my company. I got some process issues here, and I got some mediums up here too that are going to need some attention. I've got some greens, and the greens are signs of strength. So when you do a risk assessment at a component level, you might say, you know, so I'm thinking at the program level now, I'm saying, okay, I've got to fund the next wave of projects. Where should I focus? Probably in the red areas, because the red areas are going to hold me back. So I might want to form a project to build the policies for these areas. I might have another project to develop some technology here, because I'm missing some technology to do some governance. So this becomes a way to identify the holes and gaps in what you're doing, so they become, if you're planning a roadmap of projects being driven by an overall program philosophy, then these identify the next wave of things to be built. But then you have to sit back and say, are these delivering the capabilities that I want? The program's job is to deliver capabilities, usually at the business level. The program you would judge its success or failure on is as the impact that we put on the table happening. And if not, the program's a failure, because it's not happening. The program's job is to move the needle in the impact area. And so by using this as a set of tools, you can start to find out where are the potential potholes or risk areas of things you hadn't thought of before. Because when we get caught up in developing projects, we always think that this is somebody else's job. And projects have obviously scope and schedule and resource constraints, and we always believe that it's somebody else's job to fix the red areas. And if you look at things like data and data quality, any projects I've been involved in, most systems development teams do not care about data quality. They live with the impact of it, but it's not their job to change it. They say, whose job is it? Well, I don't know, it's their job. No, it's their job. Well, I don't know whose job it is. We just live with it. Or there's a lack of metadata. There's no data to tell us what the data means. Well, whose job is that? Well, it's their, no, it's their, no, I don't know whose job it is. In other words, with a lack of policy, we introduce risks unknowingly because we don't have the proper accountability models in place to drive this. So this becomes a way to start to look at what you're trying to do at a big picture. Impact is being delivered by these capabilities, using that baseball example, and taking each capability to break it into these 4 subcomponents and say, these things may exist, requiring changes. They may not exist at all, requires a net new project, and I want to put these together to find out if my capability is going to start to rise. So once we do that, we say, well, how can we mitigate these risks? We've just discovered that these might exist, so how can I mitigate them? Well, we need a strategy. So if we've identified risks around operating or scheduling, or these were business terms that from a previous example I had. So there was a process to nominate something, to confirm something, to schedule something, and operate something. So if those risks are compromised or not living up to their potential, then some of these other words are just strategies or mitigation ideas to make those business capabilities more enhanced. Now, if we look at the analytics piece, we might have the analytics, we want to be able to predict something, describe stuff through measurements, to prescribe actions, and to diagnose problems. These are all sort of 4 categories of analytics we could put in place to drive insights to make the businesses change. So if something isn't working properly, we might have to develop skills, develop literacy, develop policies. So those become the mitigating or countermeasures we can put in place to change and reduce the risk we're taking on. At the data level, we might have the capacity to acquire data, to manage its quality, the capacity to secure it, and the capacity to provision it. So if those are 4 critical capabilities, we may find out that we have a lack of policy, a lack of skills, a lack of audit policies, a lack of monitoring ability, a lack of data literacy. All of these become countermeasures to put in place to reduce the risk in those areas. So we've discovered the risk, now we're trying to say, what do we do about them? How do we implement countermeasures to elevate and reduce that risk area? Organizational capabilities, the capacity to develop people or teams, the capacity to manage, the capacity to transform, and the capacity to lead. So if these are things we think are important and we find out we're not doing a very good job there, then some mitigating strategies are to improve literacy, improve our problem framing skills, our communications and critical thinking skills. Management piece is policies around how people progress through a career, maybe rethink how we're incenting and motivating people, compensation models, team structures, et cetera. So these become the countermeasures to manage the people. The capacity to transform is, again, the culture may say it's full of fear and mistrust, so therefore you're not going to transform myself. So we have to have countermeasures to reduce the fear, to increase the trust, so we can start to transform. So this gives you ideas of how to identify those. The capacity to lead is based on sometimes there's a lack of accountability. People don't know who's in charge. There's a lack of governance. We don't have policies around how to do this. There's a lack of ownership and a lack of sponsorship. Many people are disengaged when you get into data-driven stuff. It's always somebody else's problem. I find that when organizations appoint, there's new titles like a chief data officer or a chief analytics officer or chief performance officer, these people are being appointed now at the executive level. I've seen many companies doing this. It's to exactly deal with this countermeasure. Assign leadership, assign accountabilities, so we now know who's in charge of this. And there's a lightning rod now for getting this done. In the past, it was very diffuse and nobody got it done, so we had data quality problems. We had this, we had that, we had this. And so this is a way to identify the need, and these countermeasures become strategies to reduce the risk so that you're, and most of these are not project risks, most of these are program risks, okay? So it's at the program level, it's like we got great projects doing great things, but they're not adding up to a result. And quite often it's because of these things. And that's what I'm trying to get across here, is using a framework to have those discussions so you can identify areas that are of weakness and say, it's here that's causing me the problem. I've got to set a policy or an accountability or something here to make that happen so that the project results add up to that team's project results and we get the impact we're looking for. So that's the same thing. So just to summarize, and we'll take a couple of questions. I was trying to address these kind of basic questions. What does data-driven really mean? And it means you're making a significant business impact in a desired area because you've chosen to take on providing new information to business decision makers, and they have to change their behavior to be receptive to that. So data-driven means evidence-based decision making combined with personal experience. It's not data versus experience. It's augmenting people's experience with data. So that's what data-driven means. It's evidence-based decision making. Success is defined by a business outcome, which is a result, measurable result, a condition, a result, or an activity. And how can risks be managed and identified that hold you back here is using a capability map or model to identify the critical things one has to do and break it into components and find out where are we exposed or weak so we can build projects to replace those weak areas, and then they add up to the impact we're looking for. So that's all I have to say. So I've got time for a few minutes for some questions or comments or whatever, and if you have some, I'd appreciate them, and I'd like to thank you for your attention, and hopefully it's been useful to you. Any comments, questions? Yes?
I have a question. I want to get your view on something. You mentioned about risk assessment and how we can get each parameter mapped in terms of whether it's high, low, medium. Many times we get that view from the project manager. The project manager gives that risk assessment back to the project sponsor or whatever in the initiation stage. But to avoid, what I have faced is, I used to be a portfolio, I used to be part of a PMO. So what I faced is, to avoid a possible rejection of that project's budget because of high risk, a project manager is just gonna say medium, or give a lower rating for most of the parameters. But I was just trying to figure out, how do we get to a more granular
My perspective is, it's the high risk areas you want to address with a project. So by definition, the project is scoped to identify a high risk area. Because if we don't, it's like driving your car with a flat tire. You might go a half a block, but if or maybe there's a really big chance your tire is going to go flat on your trip home. If you want to know that in advance, so you can take proactive action before you get in your car. Because the bad thing will happen. If you know about the risk now, you might change the tire or inflate it or something. You want to, it's not that the project has a lot of risks, you form a project to address the known risks. That's a difference. You see what I mean? So you're on purpose targeting the risk with a project. And if the risk is a lack of policy or a lack of something else, the projects are framed to address that pain point. It's a way to discover the scope of your future projects, I think, is to find what you should be working on is the areas where you have high risk to lower them. Okay?
I think the nature of this question, the way I understood it, correct me if I'm wrong, is that if there's high risks identified in projects, they need to be rejected. If part of the PMO's responsibility is the selection process, right?
Yes,
this is it,
So my question was more into, how can we get to the granular level and actually verify whether the risks are valid or not?
Oh, okay, good. I get it. So I stopped at the component level, right? I said, like, one of them was technologies. Another one was processes. You need to drill those into which technologies, which processes, which policies. Because though it could be you have 10 policies in place, but you don't have the 11th or 12th policy you need. So you're trying to find out either the missing policies or the missing technologies or the ones that aren't working well. So you need to take what I had and drill it into examples of each and start to assess the risks of those individual, call them subcomponents. Okay? Does that make sense? Okay. Yes?
Is there the risk of having too many that actually prohibit a project from moving forward? So, I mean, I was in an organization which has a ton of policies and processes that have to be adhered to, and they tend to halt projects from creating that greater capability, right? So it's not getting to the level that it needs to, so that you're seeing, as you said, on a program level, the improvements and achieving the results desired by the sponsor or stakeholder or corporation. And we have a lot of processes or policies. Do you see that being a hindrance to get there, that sometimes you need to?
Oh, they could be the wrong policies, or there's too many policies. The question here is, do you have the right policies? Because if you want to become data-driven, it means you have to change your behavior. Because if you weren't data-driven yesterday, and you want to be tomorrow, what policies do you have to have in place to support that? And a lot of them are around how we make decisions, how we govern data, how we communicate with each other. So the policies we have in place may be outdated from that idea. So the question is, maybe the policies need to be updated or refreshed, as opposed to more of them. Are they the right ones?